Welcome back to AM Northwest. Saturday marks Elvis Presley's 87th birthday, but much of what we think we remember of the king of rock and roll's death is not always true. Here to reveal the facts, we welcome the author of Destined to Die Young, Sally Hoedel. Hi, Sally.
Hello, so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Now, you've been a long-time Elvis fan. Can you tell me about your history of your fandom of him?
Sure, I've been a fan since I was a little kid. You know, I always say I was lucky that my childhood had a soundtrack because my dad would play records all the time, and it was a lot of Frank Sinatra and things like that, but there was also a lot of Elvis in there, and that's certainly where, that was my first exposure to Elvis. And even as a kid, I always read the books, and as a journalist and a writer, this was just kind of a, crossroads of personal and professional endeavor coming together, because I did feel like I had this, this idea that was worth following through. And once I started the research, the evidence was there. So that's kind of the, the beginning of this book, which has become, it's just been an incredible project to be a part of.
Well, even the title, Elvis, Destined to Die Young, says a lot about what you found out, because I think most of us believe that he was destined to die young. But so tell me more. I mean, but we think of it as his drug abuse, his overeating, right, his all of that. So, but tell me, it turns out we're wrong, because he had some issues when it comes back to his grandparents, right?
Absolutely, and it's not, it's no one's fault that we think so differently about Elvis, really, than the accurate way. It's just that he has been such a victim of sensationalism, because he is larger than life. He is iconic. Almost 45 years after his death, he is still recognizable around the world by his image and his first name alone.
Yeah.
And that kind of status leads to all that sensationalism, and when things get repeated enough over 4 decades, they kind of become fact. So yeah, one of my jobs was to restore his humanity, but to get back to the human aspect of this story, and not just that sex, drugs, and rock and roll narrative. And what I found was that his maternal grandparents were first cousins, so that led to a lot of issues for Elvis's mother. As a lifelong fan, I always thought it was interesting that Elvis and Gladys died at a similar age. Yeah. He's 42, she's 46, similar 4-year period of degenerative health. And I always thought there had to be a reason for that. So when I discovered that first cousin marriage, I thought, that could be it. And then when you look at his family tree, Gladys has 3 brothers who also die in their 40s, and heart, liver-related issues. And then when Elvis dies, in his 40s, heart, liver-related issues, right, it stops being a coincidence, and there's much more there. And by just doing that reverse study up his family tree, it tells us a lot. And he was struggling with a lot of health issues. So
it wasn't the fact that he was abusing drugs.
I think the question, from a journalistic standpoint, is why did Elvis turn to prescription medication in the first place? And that question's never been asked, it's never been answered. Right. It's never been answered to this. And there has to be a reason. There has to be. And he turned to medication early in 1956 to treat insomnia, which was something of it was a lifelong problem for him. And it worked. So
boy, that's really interesting that you say that, because Michael Jackson, the same problem, Prince, the same problem. Okay.
Yeah. So by 1977, though, Elvis has disease or disorder in 9 of the 11 systems of the body. And again, always written off as the end result of the prescription medication. Yeah. But my research shows that there's evidence that at least 5 of those were present prior to fame, most likely since birth. And obviously the medication couldn't have caused it. And it was really more of a, Elvis was trying to find a way to be Elvis Presley. His story has long been told as one of self-destruction. I really think it's a story of survival. Yeah. First extreme poverty, and then fame like no one had experienced before. And then he has all these health ailments, even as simple as something as insomnia, up to something much more difficult, like he had a serious immune system, he had a heart issue, he had a lung disorder that was genetic in nature, a serious colon problem that we now believe is genetic in nature. Those things were very hard to be Elvis Presley with.
And he was described as being a glutton, but he really wasn't.
I think a lot of that comes just from being the king, right? The king of rock and roll. So I just think that's kind of a natural connotation. He was indulgent sometimes, as we all are. Right. But he also gave so much away. And I think when we look at him through that lens of a glutton, self-indulgent, we forget just how generous he was. And it started just with, his career. He wanted to pull his family out of poverty. That was really his driving motivation, much more so than the music.
And you also mentioned he wasn't a depressed recluse.
Yeah, again, I think that's kind of the idea people have of him, especially in 1977, because he tours like crazy. And when he does go home, he wants some privacy, and he does stay in his room a lot. And then, towards the closer it gets to August of 77, he's staying in his room more. But I think we now realize that he was just more and more ill. And it was very difficult for him to perform like he wanted to and to live like he wanted to. And I think there was an element of depression within that, you know, that comes with that kind of illness. But he loved being Elvis, and he said that time and time again, too.
You've mentioned this before, but he had so many health issues, and it turns out he did not die of a drug overdose.
Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence of that, because a drug overdose would have been a long, slow death, kind of a coma-like death. His death was very quick. He was in the bathroom, as everybody knows. He's kind of been reduced to that, you know, in some ways. But he had a cardiac event, and he died very, very quickly. So it was definitely heart-related. This heart issue is throughout his family. Again, it's in his mother. It's in 3 of his uncles. There's direct evidence of it. And they didn't live his lifestyle. We have to remember that.
Yeah, exactly. We want to tell our viewers the book again is titled Destined to Die Young. Lots of new, fascinating information. Sally Hoedel, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.